Ready?
Oh, yes.
Ready? Okay, let's go learn. The Rambam we got.
Hello, Alex.
Welcome, good evening everyone. Tonight we are learning Parshas Shoftim. Not a long Parsha, actually, but a very interesting Parsha. If you want to look up the Parsha in your own Chumashim, you can find it on page 1024. And it only goes till page 1044, I believe. Yes. 97 verses. Parsha begins, and the Parsha talks a lot about this week leaders. The very beginning of this Parsha and the name of the Parsha is Shoftim. What does a Shofet mean in Hebrew? A judge. And the Torah commands us, Shoftim v'shoitrim titen lecha b'chol sheorecha, judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities. And this is actually a commandment to establish a court of justice, Bet Mishpat, called in Hebrew. And the courts are to be involved in resolving disputes. Even though this was already mentioned in Chumash Shmois, those who remember, in Chumash Shmois, in Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah went on in length and discussed the idea of establishing court homes, and there was a lot of laws, what happens and what's the deals and what's the punishments when people are fighting and what's the consequences. But this week comes and tells us that wherever you learn the Parshas Mishpatim, different payments, different compensation for injuries and damages, all that has to be settled in a courthouse. And it has to be a Jewish courthouse. And the Torah goes on first by telling us they have judges, but you also have officers, but their job is to facilitate the ruling of the judges, to make sure that the legislators, the different parties involved, shall actually practice that which was ordered by the court. This Parsha mentions very strict guidance to the judges, mainly as standing away from any type of bribery. Bribes is called in the Torah shochad, on verse 19. Shochad. Some of our sages tell us that the word for bribery is shochad, which actually is one word which is made up of two. Shehu chad, that you are becoming one with. Meaning that when you receive bribery from one of the parties, you become one with them. And you can't anymore see objectively how to rule that case. A very strict prohibition about shochad, and in the Talmud, in the Gemara, there is very beautiful stories about different sages who stayed away from involving themselves in different disputes just because they're concerned that one of the parties were involved with some type of shoichad. The guy gave him a Shabbos challah. They gave the judge, the rabbi, some lichvezva, some help, some good Shabbos, good Yom Tov, something, he set him down next to him, whatever ideas that the sages is to very, very carefully evaluate before taking upon themselves to rule or to get involved in judgment, was to see, is this a person which I can actually judge objectively and truthfully, or I should refer him to the rabbi of the next city, because here I received some benefit and it would be probably not 100% an objective ruling. The Torah goes on further with different laws regarding judges, witnesses, discredited witnesses, how the Jewish court works, witnesses. We don't believe in a jury system and other types of systems which other modern and ancient secular court systems are established on. Judaism, when it comes specifically to capital punishment, it's only through witnesses, nothing else. And again, the importance of us to obey the rulings of the judges is very strictly discussed in this week's Parsha. The next part of the Parsha, which starts on page 1028, is the role of kings. Apparently, Judaism is a religion which believes in monarchs, in monarchy, which we will discuss in a few minutes. As you follow that section, the Torah goes on with a very beautiful list on page 1030 of various types of gifts that we are providing, we are obligated to share from our own belongings with another group of leaders, and this time it is the priests, the Kohanim. They don't get their own share in the land, meaning no personal belonging, but you see on verse 3, the Torah says, and that should be the due of the Kohanim from the people. And it goes with a long list. From every ox, we give them that. From every sheep, they get that. From the grain, from the wine, from the oil, from the wool. There is a long list which are referred to as matnot keuna, gifts to the priests. Gifts to the priests and gifts to the Levites. The next part of the Parsha deals with false leadership, and this time it is the false prophets who will come and try to, take you off the path, the road, and this is basically, in general, as the Parsha goes on. So it's a Parsha which deals a lot with manhigim. Manhigim means leaders, various types of leaders. So when it comes to the king, so let's read, first of all, how the Torah introduces the king. So we are turning back to page 1028, verse 14. It says the Torah as follows: Ki savoy elo oretz asher Hashem eleikecho noisein loch. When you come to the land that Hashem, your God, gives you. V'yerishto v'yoshavto bo. Once you possess it and settle in it, as we spoke many times, It wasn't right away when they entered the land, they possessed the land, and obviously it wasn't right away that they settled in the land. It took them 14 years to conquer it and to divide it and to make sure that all the Shvatim have where to live and where to dwell, and everybody got their share. Says the Torah, ve'omarto, and you will say, Osimo olai melech kechol agoyim asher spivoisai. I will set a king over myself like all the nations that are around me. Okay? Then what? If that's what you would desire. So the Torah says, verse 15, yes, actually there's a mitzvah. Soim tasim olecha melech, you shall surely set over yourself a king. Asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha boi, a king whom Hashem your God shall choose. Mikerev achecho tasim olecha melech, from amongst your brethren shall you set a king over yourself. Lo yisucha lo sesolecho ish nochri asher lo yochichau. You cannot place over yourself a foreign man who is not you brother, which is clearly indicating basically that the king has to be a Jewish king, a Jewish king. And this is that the Torah describes the situation when Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, are settled in their land, and somehow you identify that the nations around you have kings. Each one has an appointed king who leads them, and the people are coming and requesting a king. So the Torah says, let me tell you, if you want to have a king, which is great, you should have one. But the mitzvah is that that king can only be Jewish. You can't have in Israel a non-Jewish king. And then the Torah goes on with further laws which talks about the king directly. How many wives, how many horses, he should have an extra Torah written for himself. Very strict information about the king, how he should conduct himself properly. Which is more interesting is when it comes the last order to the king on verse 20 in the bottom of the page. Usually we think a king has to be a state of leadership, you have to be uplifted, perhaps arrogant. Says the Torah, no. Anything which I'm telling you about the king, lebilti rum levavai, his heart does not become haughty, over Mi'echov, over his brother. The king has to be humble. It's a pre-request, it's a precondition for the king to be successful. He has to be humble, which is also paradoxical. Once we usually think about kings and leaders, that they are, usually very,
Haughty.
What?
Haughty.
Very haughty, very arrogant sometimes. And the Torah makes it that no, you should know that humility with leadership is no contradiction. The opposite. Take the first Jew, Abraham. What did he say? Ve'onoichi ofar ve'efer. He turned to God and said, who am I? I'm just dust and ash. And at the same time when he says those words, I am just dust and ash, he's demanding by God to protect the people of Sodom. So requesting protection for the people of Sodom and at the same time holding himself humble was not a feel of any contradiction, vice versa. Moshe, who was the humblest person of the face of the earth, was standing and demanding from God to forgive the Am Yisrael for the sin of the golden calf, which is an act seemingly of arrogance and force. To be humble and at the same time to feel valuable and strong and encouraged is no contradiction, the opposite. That's the real sign of a Jewish king. This description which we have in this week's Parsha, when did it actually take place? That was about 350 years after the Parsha was given. At that time, it was in the times of Samuel the prophet, Shmuel and Navi, and the people came over to Shmuel. Shmuel was seemingly at that time the leader, and they asked him, Simo lonu melech leshoftenu kechol hagoyim. They actually materialized this description, this scenario, which the Torah gives us, and it's written in the book of Shmuel, that he came to Samuel the prophet and he says, Shmuel, we do want a king to lead us just like the people in the nations around us have kings, just like the Torah describes. And Shmuel listened, and he appointed a king for them, which was the first described Jewish king, which is Shaul, the son of Kish, from the tribe of Binyamin, right? Of Benjamin. He was the first Jewish king. And later on, Shmuel anointed as a king David, the son of Yishai, which was from the tribe of Yehuda. So the first king was Shaul from the tribe of Binyamin, and later became David. And this actually took place 450 years and 50 years later. Which is interesting that the Balaturi many times uses letters and words in the Torah to find insight alluding to historical or other similar events which are not specifically written out, but Balaturim is he was a grandson of Rashi. He finds a lot of times ways to look on words and letters in the verses which so-called in his words are hiding some of the information that we only discovered later. So the Balaturim says, if you look on this pasuk that we just read, Kisavoy Elo'oretz Asher Hashem Elokecho Noisem Lecho V'yorishto V'yoshafto Bo. The word V'yoshafto, and you should settle there, dwell there. In every other time the Torah mentions the word V'yoshafto, it spells out Vav Yud Shin Beis Tov, V'yoshafta. This is from the only times that the word V'yoshafta is written with a hey at the end of the word. V'yoshafta, you see? There's a hey, there's an additional hey. And he explains that this additional hey is actually alluding to the 5 generations which is going to pass between the time when this mitzvah was discussed until it was actually materialized. It was 5 generations at the Rambam, and the Rambam talks about the order of how the Torah was transmitted from Moshe. So he says Moshe is generation number 1. His student and successor Yeshua ben Nun is generation number 2. Then he says Pinchas, the priest, the son of Eliezer, is considered generation number 3. And then Eli Cohen, the priest Eli, which was the priest in the tabernacle of Shiloh, the story with Hannah, with Eli, is generation number 4. And Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet, is generation number 5. And this is the 5th generation, which according to the Balaturim, the Torah alludes with the word V'yoshafto mitahei is to allude to us that it's going to take 5 generations. Not everything is a process. It's a process. It will take 5 generations until it will actually happen. The king, the required king, as we just saw in the verse, is Mikerev Achecho. Mikerev Achecho means from the midst of your brothers, which has to be from the family of Am Yisrael, from the Jewish people. And the Torah specifically warns, Loi sucha loses olecho ish nochri asher lo yachichol. You should not appoint for yourself a non-Jew who is not your brother. It doesn't just mention it in a positive connotation that you should take a Jewish man as a king, but it also further strengthens that commandment by adding a negative prohibition that I want you again to make sure that that king shall not be anyone who is not your brother. And as it be, relax. What happened? You okay? Is this usually the sign that Mashiach is about to come? You don't have to be nervous. If Mashiach comes, it's going to be good. The Gemara goes on. Those who learn Gemara Sanhedrin know there's a whole section in the Gemara discusses who is the qualified person to be a king. It has to be not only a Jewish man, it has to be a Jewish man from birth. And as much that we love and we consider on every given level that a convert, a Gael, is considered Jewish on every level, when it comes to be a king, he can't even be a convert. He can't even be somebody that one of his parents were converted. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud of to how many generations and so on. There was a famous example of a person who did not follow the Torah's orders, and he became king by force despite his questionable lineage. That was King Horus. King Horus, I don't know if you call him Herod in English. Yeah. Herod. He was the king who was actually at the end. He was the king at the end of the second temple at the end of Bai Sheni. He wasn't originally from a Jewish family. He was a wonderful man on many other levels, to the point that the Talmud says that the way he took care of the temple, in decorating it, in investing in it, of beautifying it, that the Talmud makes a statement that one who did not see Horus's temple never saw a beautiful building in his life. It's a Talmudic statement, meaning that he could have seen and throughout history great, beautiful structures, but still Horus' investment into the temple was great. But he wasn't fitting because he wasn't from the family of Israel, and the Torah somehow, when it comes to king, says that it has to be from the mishpacha, and he wasn't fitting to be. It wasn't accepted totally, to the point that we know, unfortunately, of a number of very bad activities that Orders was also involved, to the point that he killed a lot of the Chachamim, a lot of the Jewish scholars, a lot of the rabbis. The only reason that he went involved himself in the temple because one of the rabbis that he had left, I think his name was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, after causing him to turn blind, he himself was responsible to blind them. But still, Orders wanted to know if he can somehow recover from his evil behaviors, and Rabbi Bava told him, you darkened the light of the world by killing these rabbis. You should involve yourself in illuminating the world by taking care of the temple. And this was Horus, which is interesting even the name Hordus, the Balaturim says that the word Hordus in Hebrew is spelled Hey, which is 5, Vav, which is 6, makes it 11, Reish is 200, so it's 211, Dalet is 4, so it's 215,
13.
and Vav is 6, so it's 221, and Samach is 60.
271.
No. It's Hey, Vav, Reish, 211 plus Dalet is 4, 15 plus Vav 6 is 221.
Yes.
Plus 200 plus Samach is 60, so 281.
81, yeah.
Right, or this is 281, which is the same numerical value as the word that the Torah uses for a non-Jewish king, Nochri. It says in the verse, Nochri. That's what the pasuk says. Nochri is 50 plus 20 plus 200 plus 10 is also the all 280 or 200. The one usually by gematria doesn't count. But anyway, among the Jewish people, who is considered to be the qualified candidate for king? So as you look in the Torah, essentially there is no conditions. There is no conditions. Apparently, you can have a king being appointed from every tribe, as we're going to see soon in the Rambam. The Rambam specifically says, the Rambam wrote a section, which is actually the last section in the book of Mishnah Torah, is what the Rambam called the laws of king, right? And the Rambam clearly writes that if a Navi, if a prophet, appoints a king of any tribe of Israel, and as long as that king follows the way of Torah and is fighting the words of God, he is a qualified king, and all the laws of king will relate to him. In the other end, it was Yaakov, our forefather, who already established before he died, when 12 kids, the 12 tribes came to each one receive his blessing before the passing of Jacob. So at that time, who did he so-called prescribed kingship?
Yehuda.
To Yehuda. He gave it to the tribe of Yehuda. To the point, as the Rambam says in the same halacha, that even though the main responsibility for kingship goes to David, but David was from a descendant of Yehuda, the Rambam says the main has to come to David. But sometimes it wasn't a Yehudite. Specifically, even the first king, Shaul. Shaul was a Benjaminite. He wasn't a Yehudite. Some commentaries actually say that the name Shaul, what's in Hebrew? When you say something is borrowed, what do you say? Shaul. His name was Shaul because he was on borrowed time. He wasn't meant to be a permanent king forever, because as the Rambam points out, for a temporary time period, or for so-called reasons that is needed, let's say there's no one of the tribe of Yehuda available now to serve as a king, so you could appoint a non-Yehudite, but this is only temporary. The Rambam brings the example that there was Achia Shiloni appointed Yerovam as a king. It was temporary. But mainly it is from the tribe of Yehuda, Mikerev Achecho, Tosim Olecho Melech, Malchut comes from the connection of Yehuda. They are the ones which are the ones who deserved the level of kingship, all the way to the ultimate king. The ultimate king is who? Moshiach. And Moshiach is also going to be, as the Rambam says, that he has to be from the tribe of Yehuda. Right? In Pirkei Avot, when it talks about the how to acquire royalty, Malchus, it says that Malchus is acquired with 30 values, 30 qualities. Remember that? Yeah. Gdoilo Torah, Yoisam and Akunim and Malchus. There is 30 different qualities which you need to have in order to acquire royalty. You need to have 24 to acquire priesthood and 48 to acquire Torah learning. It's interesting that Yehuda, the Talmud doesn't go on with what are the 30. This is being explained elsewhere. But it's interesting that even Yehuda is also the gematria of 30, right? Yehuda, Yud is 10, He is 5, Vav is 6, so it's 21, Dalet is 4, 25, and Hey. So Yehuda is also 30. So you see that somehow there's a relationship between the 30 values that Malchus is acquired to Yehuda. Even King David, how old was King David when he was appointed as king? It says, he was 30 years old and he became a king. So there's a big discussion, and we spoke about it in previous years. It's an ongoing discussion, and everybody is studying this Parsha section, which deals with king, knows about this famous question and discussion. In the one end, this Parsha clearly indicates, or states, doesn't indicate, that if you want a king like all the nations, as they say in Ivrit, bevakasha, go for it. And there's a mitzvah. And historically, like I said before, 5 generations later it happened. About 350 years later it happened. And suddenly it wasn't so easy. Right? They got a king. But God was not happy with them. You want a king? Why do you need a king? As if he never told us that the king is okay. And God was very upset. What happened to my people again? That they need a king. Hello? It's only 5 generations. We can look up in the Torah, it's okay. And you all know that all the commentaries are discussing it, all the 2 different types of kings. And God agreed to one type of king and they wanted another type of king. Basically, the point is that there is the king which generates respect to God. And this is the kosher king, the welcome king. And then there is the king which tells you how to behave, what to conduct yourself, and what's right and wrong. And God feels that we are not babies. We, as a people, should not need the type of kingship which Pirkei Avot says, if not for the king, we would have swallowed each other alive. That's a king which maybe others need. But the expectation and the anticipation is that you're a grown up man and woman and you don't need a babysitter. And somehow we wanted a babysitter. And that's what made God upset. This is general, the give and take, and we discussed it in previous years. I want to show you something further on that discussion. And this is something very interesting we find in the Rambam regarding kings. Okay? So how do we appoint a king? What happens? When it comes to appoint a king, there is the Rambam, like I said before, wrote 12 chapters, which is the last section of the 14 volumes of Rambam. called Ilchos Melochim. Very fascinating laws. And as I always say, the Rabbi used to say, you're not going to find it anywhere else. That's why we have to study Rambam, because in Shulchan Aruch, there is no section which talks the laws of kings. Because the Shulchan Aruch, which was written 500 years ago by Rabbi Yosef Karo, was only recording contemporary halacha. The Rambam, which was written 850 years ago, was not only writing contemporary halacha, the Rambam summarized the entire oral tradition. He qualified every subject of Jewish law, including kings, which even though in the Rambam's times, like today's day, there is no concept of Jewish monarch. You're going to have to wait for Mashiach to come, but the Rambam wrote about Mashiach also. He qualified everything into law. So the Rambam wrote a beautiful section, which is called the laws of a king. And anyone who wants to know what true royalty is, how does a king have to conduct himself, how we should obey the king's rules, and on and on and on and on. If you want to find it in a qualified text, the only address you're going to find it is in the book of Rambam, the last section of Rambam. When it comes to Rambam, and he says as follows. There's a lot of beautiful things, but let me share with you one halacha. In chapter 1, halacha 7, the Rambam says like this. I'm going to go straight to the translation. Rambam says, when you appoint a king, you have to anoint him with the anointing oil. And he brings the story of Shmuel. That what did Shmuel do? It says in the book of Shmuel, beginning of Shmuel, right away in the beginning of chapter 10, Vayikach Shmuel espach shemen. Shmuel took the jar of oil, Vayitzek al roishoy, and he poured it over his head, Shkeyu, and he was then anointed as a king. And the Rambam says once one king is anointed, as long that he has children, his children do not need to be anointed again. They are becoming automatically the kings following him, because as the verse, it brings this big Parsha. It says, "Leman yorich yorim amamlachtoi," the king should live long. Who ubanov, him and his sons, the care of Israel. And if he only has one child and he's very small, so we all have to be patient and wait for this child to grow up. And as the Rambam brings, that's what Yehoiada did for Yoash, and the older one comes before the younger one, as long, obviously, that they deserve it. If you can have a child of a king who behaves like a gangster, then you're going to send them flying. You're going to go to the next family, right? But one thing is here that you see clearly that one of the elements in the process of anointing a king is the Rambam mentioning specifically the pouring of the anointing oil over the head. And the question which commentaries ask, that the Rambam mentions that, but in the Torah, we also talk about the anointing oil. But when, in where, and in which context do we find the anointing oil is regarding the Kohen. The Kohen Gadol specifically, the high priest. So it says, how does he become a high priest? So the Torah went in Parshas Kisisa and told us specifically as being done the way you anoint him, and onward and onward. And the question is, how comes there's no mentioning in the Torah about anointing the king? If the Torah would not discuss about anointing altogether and leave it all to the oral tradition, to the Torah Shabbal Peh, to share with us this idea, so then fine, it's not something what the Torah discusses. This is being left for what's it called, for the Talmud. Like many areas in Judaism, which is the job and the responsibility of the Torah Shabbal Peh, of the oral tradition, to teach us to us. But when it comes to kings, to Kohanim, the Torah does discuss it. And when it comes to kings, suddenly the Torah is quiet, it doesn't say anything. The Rambam obviously is a source for it, it's in the Talmud and onward, but the question is, why doesn't the Torah share any information about anointing a king? How the anointing is taking place? Specifically, the Rambam continues and he says like this. He says like this. Listen to that. Yeah, should be Jewish, can be a woman. Sorry, ladies. Okay, and if the father is a king, you don't have to anoint him again. Okay, and then he says that he also has to be anointed like by a prophet. He has to be appointed by a prophet. Oh, Navi has to be appointed by a prophet, and Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the high court, the Supreme Court of Judaism, also have to anoint them, have to appoint them. And he says, just like Yeshua bin Nun. Yeshua bin Nun was appointed as king by who? By Moshe Rabbeinu, by Moshe and Moshe's court. Moshe himself had a court of Sanhedrin, and it was Moshe and his court who together anointed. So Moshe himself was a king, okay? Was a king, and Moshe was obviously a prophet. He was the greatest of prophets, so he is the Navi. Moshe is the prophet. And at the same time, Moshe had a court, right? Remember when his father-in-law gave him the idea to establish court? So he had a court, and Moshe, the Navi in his court, appointed Joshua to serve as leader, which the Rambam considers as serving as king. And same thing, every time we are going to appoint a king, as it's going to be, in addition to the anointing oil, it's going to have to be done by a prophet, like Samuel the prophet was the one who introduced David and before that Saul, together with his court. But it's interesting is when you learn in Parsha Pinchas, which is the Parsha which talks about Moshe appointing Yeshua bin Nun, so it says that he was anointed with the anointing oil. I'm sorry, it says only that he leaned his hands on him. What is it called? Smicha. Right? Vayismoich es yoda yolav. He leaned his hand on it. Vayetzaveyu, and he commanded him and he instructed him how to continue the leadership. But it also doesn't mention anything about anointing oil when it came to Yeshua. So it's interesting. The Torah does not mention anything about anointing oil regarding kings altogether. Even when we discuss Yeshua bin Nun, who became the successor to Moshe, and as the Rambam mentioned as a king, it doesn't talk anything about the oil. So this is a question which is also being discussed by the commentaries of the Rambam. The Rebbe once discussed it in length, this idea. But there's only a few minutes left, so I'm going to tell you in very short what the Rebbe said. This goes back to what we spoke before, the two types of king. And what is the ideal king, and what is the so-called the secondary king. The Rebbe says something interesting. Historically, throughout all the time when we had kings, we had a lot of kings, right? There was a book in Tanakh called Melachim. There were kings of Yehuda, then there was a split, and we also had kings of Israel. There were good kings, there were very, very not good kings. There were very, very good kings. You know, the story, the history of Jewish anarchism, if there's such a word, is a shtick story. It's a very big piece of our development as a people. But now, what we see is something very interesting, and this is something which takes place throughout the history of Jewish kings. And this is that while there was a king, there was also another position of leadership at the same time. And that position was called the Nasi. Today they translate Nasi as president. Nasi, or the Rosh HaSanhedrin, the president and the leader of the Sanhedrin of the Supreme Court. He was mainly, we can describe him as the spiritual leader of the Jewish nation. The Rambam specifically says, when he talks about the Nasi, the Rambam in his introduction to his book, he says that the Nasi was placed just behind, under Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rambam said, just like Moshe's main job, what was the Rabbeinu? What's Rabbeinu mean? The Rav, the teacher. Moshe was to teach Torah to the Jewish people, and Moshe was the leader and the head of the Bedin Gadol, the great court, the Sanhedrin. So too, every era and every generation had someone whose title was Nasi, or Nasi, president. President of what? President Sanhedrin. And he was the ultimate individual as in the leadership of teaching, instruction, spiritual guidance. How was he appointed? His appointment came to smicha. Every leader of Sanhedrin had to be musmach, had to be anointed, appointed, receiving his ordination from the one preceding him, who got his ordination from the one preceding him, who got his ordination from the one preceding him, all the way to who? To Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu puts his hand on one, that one puts his hand on the other one, and you create a chain of one long hand going from Moshe Rabbeinu, from leader to leader, from Nasi to Nasi, and that's how that person was appointed, and with his scholarly achievement, he was appointed to be the Nasi. Simultaneously, at the same time, when he serves as the Nasi, you have together with him in the same generation somebody else who serves as what?
A king.
As Melech, as king. With what is the purpose of the king, as he describes in Parshas Pinchas, Asher Yetzer Lifneim ve'asher Yovei Lifneim, who goes out before them and he comes in before them. Rashi says, goes out where? Comes in from where? Says Rashi, what in Chumash? Lemilchama. He goes to fight. He goes in fighting for them, fighting for their rights, fighting for conquering land, fighting against their enemies. Mainly, his responsibility of the Melech was what? Was for the physical needs of the people. One was for the spiritual needs, and the other one, the Melech, was for the physical needs. And how was the Melech appointed? He was appointed by being anointed. Anointed by a prophet, like we said before, and the 70 elders. These two positions existed historically, coexisted throughout the time when we had kings, and at the same time there was Nasi, there was leaders. Says the Rebbe now, if you look at this description of how historically the positions worked, then we can go back to our question. What happened to Yeshua? How come there is no anointing oil by Yeshua? And why doesn't the Torah even mention it? Says the Rebbe as follows. You know what the ideal desire of Torah is? That it should not be two positions. There's no need for two positions. There's no need for two people. Ideally, you can have one person who is the Nasi, who is the spiritual leader, and at the same time, he is the Melech, he is also the physical leader, the king. Because what is a Melech? Says the Rambam, what's the Melech? What's the purpose of a king? The Rambam says very interestingly. The Rambam says, Tiye magamasayu machshavtoi lehorim daso emes. Rambam, you know what a king is? In the end of chapter 4. It's good to know it. The Rambam says, you know what a king, he talks about king. He's all intention. He's all planning, ideas, cabinet, meetings. He's only involving one thing. How to raise the truth of religion. Lemaloi so'elom tzedek, to fill the world entirely with righteousness and justice. For that, sometimes he has to break the bones of a wicked group. He has to fight some wars. And sometimes he just has to teach and inspire. King Solomon didn't need to break bones. But sometimes there were other kings, they had to do it. But at the same time, when you think about what is a king is the one who is able to carry the position of spiritual leadership. That's what is involved. And the truth is, that was the type of kingship personified by Moshe and even later by Yeshua ben Nun. They were both, Moshe and Yeshua were the people's spiritual leaders, and at the same time, they were also their kings. They were leading the Jewish people by taking them out of Egypt, traveling them through the desert, taking them into the land of Israel, conquering the Israel from the 31 kings. And that was the ideal state. You don't need to. The person who is leading you spiritually is leading you physically. That's the real Rebbe. Later, the position split. It didn't work out. And then you have the spiritual leadership in the hand of the Nasi, the physical in the hand of the king. And that's why Yeshua did not need the anointing oil. Because the anointing oil is for a king which leads physically, and by Yeshua, the physical leadership was just one detail in its original leadership as what? A spiritual leader. So for him, the smicha was just enough to cover it all. He's appointed as a leader, and if we need to fight, I'm going to fight too. But it's all just yet another detail in the all-encompassing position of leader of Melech, of king. Once the generations moved on, and you needed to have one person that this is his main job, taking care of the physical need, at that time, those physical people needed to be anointed. When the Torah talks about a king, like we said before, the Torah talks about the ideal king. That's why later with Samuel, God was upset. They did not ask for the ideal king. They wanted a king like all the people around us, who is going to be just taking care of us physically, who is going to tell us how to behave and what is proper conduct. That's what you need. I want that the Rabbi should be the king too. Moshiach. What is Moshiach going to be?
A king.
And a teacher. The Rambam talks about Moshiach. What is Moshiach going to do? He's going to teach us Torah. He's going to teach us everything. And at the same time, if whatever has to be taken care of physically, he's going to take care of physically too. And that's why the Torah doesn't talk about what anointing oil should be used for the king, because I don't want to talk about it. This is not the ideal king which I am assuming. I want the king who is going to serve as king because he is also the Rebbe, he is also the Nasi. You say a story. Yeah, finish up with a story. Say a story that once a businessman, those days, businessmen, a lot of business people worked with wood in the forest. He came to the Rebbe Maharash, the Shmuel, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe. Before each time making a business deal is to come to the Rebbe should give him a bracha. And once the friends suggested to make a certain investment that is going to make a lot of money, in general, like usually, he traveled to his Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him, no, that's not for you. Tu es nicht, don't get into this business. But the friends, he came to the house, tried to convince him, they felt that this is it. And he told them, Allah, the Rebbe told me, no, I'm staying away. And they told him, maybe the Rebbe didn't understand all the details, he didn't present it right. If you would have told him this and this and that, maybe the Rebbe would have changed his mind. No, after all this pressure of friends and family, and there was apparently a good prophet about to arrive, so he gave in. And as the story goes, obviously he lost all his money, the investment went bankrupt, and who is it coming? It's coming to the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe, that's what happened. So the Rebbe told him like this, a lot of Chassidim are coming to me. Business people come to me. And they ask me for advice. Why do they come to me? I never dealt in business. Why do you think they come to me? There is three different reasons why, three different thought process which people have and business people that they come to me. There is the simple Chassidim, they believe that I have divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. And therefore, when I say something, that's how it's going to happen, then they know you got to do it. As they say, no chachmas, right? Ruach HaKodesh, the Rebbe said. My wife's grandfather, Mr. Weiss, was usually like that. Sometimes businesses did not make sense to him and he even lost money there. The Rebbe told him to invest, he invested. Sometimes he made, he didn't want to invest. He had this type of story. Ruach HaKodesh, the Rebbe. Then he says they are the more sophisticated Chassidim, and they don't just rely on my divine inspiration, but they think, a Rebbe after all is spending a lot of time of learning Torah. And since his whole focus is Torah, so probably when he tells them the instructions what to invest and what not to invest, is with a view of Torah knowledge. And if that's what the Torah says, so we have to follow the Torah's instruction, and that's why they listen to me. Fine. Then there's a third group, that they are the real sophisticated people. They don't believe in my divine inspiration. They don't think that Torah wisdom helps me understand business. But why do they come to me? They say in their mind, so many people come to the Rebbe and discuss with them business. So he probably has an idea in business. after hearing all these different offers and stories and presentations, so the Rebbe probably acquired some type of idea in business, and that's why they rely on him. So the Rebbe said, listen, whether it's because of my Ruach HaKodesh, or because of my Torah, or because the fact that I'm meeting with people, you should have listened to me. If I told you not to invest, you shouldn't have invested. Why am I saying this story? Yes, you can have a leader and you come to him because he's the Nasi, he's the president. You can have because he's the Melech, and he's the one who leads you physically. But ultimately, God willing, very soon we're going to meet our leader, Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we have to remember it. It's not only his wisdom, it's not only his physical strength, it's one which is joined as one. And you know, Mashiach is also not going to need to be anointed with the oil. It says, the Rambam says, Mashiach is also not going to need, Mashiach is also not going to be anointed with the oil. And I guess the reason is because he's going to be both. He's going to be both. Besides the fact that his Zayda was David, so he was already anointed. Okay, my friend. Have a wonderful good night. Enjoy the rest of the week, the learning and the growing. We will see you, I guess, most of you on Shabbos, so this will be tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yom Tov, Laila.